You pass them. Hello, everyone. More good afternoon, I guess we're in. Today is Tuesday. It's our second week here in House Ways and Means. The door slams very easily. It is not the fault of whoever does it when it does slam. It's not about feelings, it's just the physics of the room. Should all get used to it now. So today we have a very short amount of committee time. We just have a half hour because there is a training that all the chairs and vice chairs are going to. So the building might be a really fun place for a little while. And we're going to meet our tax commissioner, talk about the December 1st letter, talk about this year's Ed Fund outlook with JFO in that half hour, and then see each other again tomorrow. Tomorrow, our first section of testimony of the day is a joint hearing with House Education. Because they're in room 11 for the next month or so, we're going to join them down there. And they're going to set up their table so that we can all sit at the same table together. And that's to hear about the Commission on the Future of Education. And then we're going to come back up here for more testimony before lunch, and then continue on from there. Again, we are focused this week on learning the basics of our tax system, as with an extra emphasis on things that impact the education fund. I think that's all of my grand intros for you. Commissioner Bolio, do you want to join us? Thank you. Really glad to have you with us. We are all going to go around and introduce ourselves to you because maybe a couple of us you haven't met yet. So, I'm Emily Brentner.
Hi. Bill Canfield.
Teddy Wozniak, Berry City.
Artie Feltus from Linden.
Mark Higley from Lowell.
Jim Maslin, Deputy Sharon Strafford, Norwich.
Carolyn Mangan from Franklin County. Should I be preparing myself to really miss you? Or no? Are you getting another job?
Hello.
Dropping bomb. No, I'm here.
We'll talk about that later. We're starting a new rumor.
In fact, I think I read it.
I'd be curious to read it myself, I guess. Am I getting fired?
She's got the inside scoop.
Yeah.
Hi, Craig. I'm Bridget Burkhart from South Burlington.
Charlie Kimball from Woodstock and Reading and Plymouth.
And Representative Holcomb is right there. And I'm sure you've met her before.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I'm Craig Bolio. I'm the tax commissioner. A little bit about me. So I've been commissioner for a little over 5 years now. I was appointed in December of 2019. But I've worked at the department longer than that. I was hired as a seasonal temporary employee in 2011. We hire temps to help with the peaks and valleys in tax season in the spring. So I worked in the personal income tax section. I worked in the corporate income tax section. I worked for several years on our VTax project, which was our big IT implementation from 2013 to 2018 that really transformed the department. So I was both a business analyst on that project and the project director for a couple of years. And then in 2018, I was appointed deputy commissioner, and in that role for about a year when the prior commissioner, Kai Sampson, left for another job, and I became commissioner at that point. So I really consider it a luxury to see the department a number of different places. Most of the people, even still at the department, know me as more than just the commissioner, right? I've worked with them as colleagues. Though as I'm in the role longer, I'm recognizing more and more there are new folks who only know me in that role and really try to keep that connection alive. I care a lot about efficiency. I care a lot about service. I care a lot about culture and employee engagement. I think we've made a lot of progress on that over the last 5 years, and more than just the time that I've been in commission. I can't take credit for all of that, but just trying to make sure that I'm knocking away obstacles that people have and really caring about doing this really serious and complicated, often scary work, right? Taxes are really scary for people, really confusing, or they can be. And we want to be there to help. And I have a really awesome team. I'm flying solo today. I normally would bring to this testimony Jake Feldman, who some of you know, and those of you who don't, I think we'll probably meet and hear a lot from this year, but he's our senior fiscal analyst. And He really is the primary author on what gets produced on the math section of the December 1 letter. But as I'll talk about, there's a lot of different people who are working on that process. So I'm here to talk about the December 1 letter and what the projections were that were released last month. So maybe if I could, I would just start with an overview of the December 1 letter and that process. So it's a statutory construct. It's in law. I think legally it's called the education tax rate letter, but I'm not a lawyer, so I call it the December 1 letter because it needs to be published by the tax commissioner by every December 1. And we use the information that we have at that time to forecast what the yields need to be and what the commensurate property tax rates would be, the statewide non-homestead, and then also the average homestead rate. There are a lot of people who do a lot of work for it, right? So there's analysts at the tax department who are doing the math. There are analysts at the Joint Fiscal Office who are doing the math. There is data that comes from the Agency of Education. They're surveying to get education spending data. Analysts at the tax department are looking at grand list growth with our equalization study. The state economists are looking at projected income growth for property tax credits. They're also looking at projected new construction, I believe, for grand list growth. Finance and management is looking at ed fund appropriations. And all of those folks work together to get to a consensus place on the math. So that's, I think, a really key part of the letter. There's a section that is actually the header is key considerations from the administration's point of view, and that has some pros and perspective from me and the administration. But the math portion of the letter is completely consensus. Everybody agrees on what those are. And the statute is very prescriptive about how the math has to be done. So there are not a lot of discretionary decisions that are getting made in there. It's really formulaic, and it's really just people. I shouldn't say it's just math, but it's a lot of really complicated math, but it is math and it is formulaic. There are a couple of things that I would flag for this year as sort of key points that I think. The first is, and it's first highlighted in the key considerations in the second paragraph, that if the rates that are projected go into effect, that would be an average increase in property tax bills of 5.9%. So just under 6%. That's sort of the first key fact that I think is important for the committee to know. That's really driven by a couple of things. And I think that feeds into sort of the next key figures. If you go on to page 3, and I think Sorcia's driving, or will be, but page 3, there's a table of projections for education spending growth, and that has a rate of growth in the top right box on that page of 6.1%. So that's one of the big drivers behind why tax rates are projected to go up. That's about $115 million of additional spending, I think. And then the other pressure mainly is coming from, there was one-time money used last year to reduce tax rates. I think that was about $69 million of one-time money. So if you don't have at least $69 million of one-time money this year, you're going to have some additional rate pressure from that. Again, the information that was available on December 1, and that is shown on the education fund outlook, is that the projection right now is there's about $33 million of sort of surplus revenue available from fiscal year 25. That's not abnormal to have leftover money, right? Not all appropriations are usually completely spent. There are different kind of reversions from different programs, and we could get details on that if folks are interested. I don't have them at my fingertips, but so you've got some rate pressure there, right? From the difference between the 69 million of one-time money that was used and the 33 that we can see on the forecast. The numbers change a lot, right? As we go through the session. So this is really supposed to be sort of a starting point for school boards to get a sense of how things are looking, for the legislature, for the administration, for Vermonters to get a sense of how things are looking. But the Agency of Education will continue to get new data on projected education spending. They'll start to get actual warned budgets, and we'll start to have votes on those budgets.
Just so our committee members know who are new to this, what happens is we get sort of regular updates from the Agency of Education as the session goes on, usually every 2 weeks, about changes in the projected education spending. And so that first line of that second chart is sort of what we're updating regularly.
Yeah, that's a moving target. The other thing that I would highlight that's a little bit different in the way the letter is constructed this year is something was passed last year in, I think it was the yield bill, the statewide adjustment. So in Vermont, we do what's called indirect equalization of tax rates. So because we have a statewide education fund where the revenue is shared statewide, because not every town reappraises at the same time, we need a mechanism to make sure that property values are generally consistent around the state. It's not a perfect mechanism and it causes a lot of confusion and heartburn, but it's what we got. In the recent year, called the common level of appraisal, or the CLA shorthanded. In recent years, as I'm sure everybody in this committee knows, real estate has been very hot in Vermont. And so all around the state, slightly different in different pockets, but generally all around the state, property values have been going up quite significantly. And that creates a lot of downward pressure on the CLAs. That has created volatility between what we call the equalized or the pre-CLA rate and then the final rate that gets shown on tax bills. And so I think that was, I don't want to speak for the legislature, but I think that was sort of the driving factor last year to implement the statewide adjustment to try to reduce that volatility. So now for purposes.
I will agree with you on the intent.
Perfect.
And just so folks know, we're going to spend more time on the CLA on Friday. So you don't need, this is not like your one chance to absorb these.
Perfect. Yeah, don't ask me any really tough stuff on the CLA because I'll just punt to Jake, who isn't here. But the purpose of the statewide adjustment is now we're not bringing property values up to 1 on the CLA. It's instead up to what the statewide average is, which is essentially just the statewide CLA, which I think is 2072 and change. So again, that means that equalized rates will go up a little bit. The pre-CLA rates will go up a little bit and create hopefully less volatility there between the equalized rates that a lot of times school boards are building and then the final rates that are shown on tax bills. So that's a little bit different in the construction of how the yields are put together and how the math is done this year. I would flag just, again, we just talked about how these are moving targets, that there's a couple of things that I sort of have in the back of my mind as we're moving through on how this may change. The picture may get more challenging as we move through the next weeks, I think for a couple of reasons. The first is that, and I think only what's been published through right now is November, but the education fund is a little under the projected revenue forecast right now. And so there will be a new revenue forecast in January, and that updates these numbers. And we don't know exactly what that will look like, but as it stands right now, the actuals against the forecast are a little bit lower than we projected. And also the education spending, the more recent data that AOE is starting to get is coming in a little bit higher than it was on the December 1 letter. And so both of those things would have pressure on the yield to reduce the yield. So again, there's going to be a lot more conversations as we go through the coming days and weeks, but this is a snapshot in time that we had on December 1. I think it might get a little bit tougher as we start to get some of those more updated numbers, but I don't have a crystal ball. And then I'm sure folks want to hear about what the governor is hoping to do. So I said it in the inaugural and I think other public statements that he's looking, if the spending comes in line as with projected in the letter, looking to use one-time surplus money to help stabilize property tax rates this year, if possible, get the average bill increase to 0. And I'm guessing most of you have heard that the governor is also planning to put out a plan for a broader education system transformation that would include adjustments to the funding system, adjustments to governance, adjustments to scale in the school systems, and also improvements to quality. And so I'm looking forward to the degree you'll have me coming back over the coming days and weeks to talk more details about that stuff.
I hope that you're spending a lot of time in here in this planning.
I'll be here quite frequently, I'm guessing.
Thank you. Yeah.
Commissioner, I'm just wondering, I'm looking at this report on the education fund outlook, and I'm trying to find the $69 million you're talking about a one-time buy down. There's a $25 million. So
I think it's probably a good question
For
for
Jay.
the JFO team. Jumping in after Craig, if you'd like.
Yeah, I'm happy to punt that there. I think the 25 is shown because it was a general fund transfer. I think Julia will correct me if I'm incorrect, but I think that the remainder of that, which is the ed fund surplus, gets factored in from line 40 on fiscal year 24, and then also line 38 in fiscal year 24. So there was some reserves there from the prior year that had been set aside, and then one-time money there. And then it all gets like baked into those numbers at the top of fiscal year 25. But if I got that all wrong, Julia will set me straight.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks for having
I
me.
appreciate your first visit here.
Yeah, appreciate it.
If you want to join us, that would be great. Ezra, I believe this is your first time sitting in the chair with the committee. We're really grateful to have you up there.
thank you. Glad to be here.
Can you say that on the record? She said I got it.
Welcome. Thank you. Ezra, as it's your first time in the committee, we can go around and say all of our names again. I think you've been in the room when we've done that. So, but I'm Emily Kornheiser, representative from Brattleboro, chair of the committee. Really glad that you're here.
Representative Bill Canfield.
Teddy Wozniak, Berry City.
Representative Carol Moody. Michael Holcomb, Windsor Orange too, and thanks for being here. Marty Feltus, Linden.
And Mark Higley from the Orleans Memorial District.
Yeah, Maslin, Windsor Orange too.
Carolyn Brandon from Franklin One.
Bridget Burkhart from Chittenden from South Burlington.
And Charlie Kimball from Woodstock, Reading, Plymouth.
And we are so glad to have you on the Ed Finance team. Thank you for joining.
Oh, happy to be here. And just for a little background about myself, I think everyone here is new for me except for Chair Kornheiser, but I actually come from DCF. I worked at their business office as a budget analyst. And so, yeah, happy to be here.
Right.
So we'd love for you two to tell us more about the outlook.
Sure. So for the record, I'm Julia Richter, also JFO. Also for the record, the commissioner was correct with respect to that 69 million. So there are a few documents posted on the committee page under our name. I'm going to share them here. Oh. Excuse me. Okay. So we've got the Ed Fund Outlook here in front of us.
Thank you.
I just want to follow up to that 69. Is that helpful if we
Yeah,
follow up?
totally. And I just wanted, we all have the paper version just in case anyone didn't find it on their desk yet.
Okay. So this is the December 1 letter outlook. This is published, as the commissioner mentioned, in consensus with the tax department. So the tax department, the commissioner publishes the letter, and then at the same time, JFO publishes a consensus outlook reflecting that all of the math we agree on. So that's what we're looking at here. With respect to the 69 million question, yes, so we've got a number of lines. I don't know what would be the most help for the committee in terms of walking through this, but I'll just point out that 69 million is a reflection of the prior year unreserved unallocated, so the surplus that the General Assembly had to work with. In addition, the 13 million in the tax rate offset reserve that the General Assembly set aside in the prior year yield bill in order to buy down rates, and a further 25 million in general fund transfer, which we're seeing up here. That was a one-time deal.
And that second reserve is also a one-time construct.
Thank you.
Can you take us through, unless there's a presentation that you already have prepared that you wanted to dive into, can you essentially just sort of take us through again how in doing the consensus you sort of came to those numbers, like it's sort of the algebra of it again?
Okay. So you'll often hear us referring to the yield model. And essentially what that is it's a model that includes data from the tax department. It's including grant list data. It's including the performance of certain revenues. We are including appropriations out of the education fund, information from the consensus economists. And essentially what we do is we take the town level grant list data, school district budget data from the Agency of Education, pupil counts, pupil weights. We take all of the pieces that go into the education fund, we put them together, and essentially what we do is we solve for what are the necessary rates, property tax rates, in order to ensure the education fund is fully funded. Of course, as we talked about last week, there's two classes of property taxes. There's the homestead property tax and there's the non-homestead property tax. It's a policy choice of how much the General Assembly wants to raise on homestead property tax and non-homestead, and to allow us to reach consensus so that it's purely a mathematical exercise. The December 1 letter statute actually spells out all of the assumptions that we need to make in order to solve for these yields. So one of those assumptions that we need to solve for in the December 1 letter is we need to assume the average bill change across homestead property taxpayers, non-homestead property taxpayers, and taxpayers who receive a property tax credit. So all three classes, we need to assume their average bill change is uniform. So that takes out a lot of those policy choices. The General Assembly doesn't need to do that, but for the purpose of the December 1 letter, we need to assume that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. And if the revenues come in softer than the projections were, as Commissioner Bolio described the possibility, what would change on the outlook?
I can speak to it. So if the non-property tax revenues came in a little softer, then that would necessitate an increase and to keep it uniform across the board, an increase in the property taxes to make up that shortfall. Or if you had some prior year money, that could also go towards that as well. But the property tax kind of serves to solve for that missing number. So if, you know, the revenue from sales tax, you know, that is kind of what it is at the end of the year. So you then have to fill in the blank space. So
Yeah, absolutely. So because that property tax is solving for that difference between what we need to fund out of the education fund and how our non-property revenues are. Of course, if non-property revenues are lower than we're forecasted, property taxes need to make up the difference. If there is a forecast that comes out next week, that is, I'm not saying this is the case. This is a huge hypothetical. If it were to be that the forecasts were to be lower for those non-property revenue sources, then that would mean that property taxes would need to increase, all else equal, in order to ensure the ed fund was fully funded. We would see that reflected in the sources lines. So if the sources, these non-property revenue sources that we're seeing here in lines 3 through 9, if those were to change either up or down, we would see those changes reflected here in our FY26 forecast. Then the question is, how are we going to solve for the property taxes? If we were to not solve for the property taxes and we were to maintain the current rates and yields that we have forecasted here, we would see a deficit here on the bottom line because we weren't raising enough money for the education fund. If we were to increase those property taxes, then we would see that in the property tax revenue lines. We'd see an increase there. And a corresponding reflection up here in our summary lines.
And then one more hypothetical question, and then I see you, Representative Odie. If districts around the state hear the governor's call to buy down the property tax rate to 0 and then make the decision to increase their budgets as a result of that, what happens in the ed fund outlook?
So if budgets increase, beyond what the agency forecasted for the December 1 letter, that means there's more money that needs to be paid out of the education fund. That's going to be reflected here in the education payment, right? We spoke about this last week. That's that ed spending aggregated up. So if school budgets choose to raise their budgets, increase their budgets, we're going to see an increase in that education payment line, which means an increase in appropriations, which means all else equal, more revenue needs to be raised from somewhere, or there needs to be a cut somewhere else in the ed fund.
Yeah, Representative Odie.
Thank you. Sorry. But I heard the list of what could happen, but would it also be true that there could be a transfer of revenue sources from the general fund into the education fund so that property tax, to keep property taxes lower, or there could be a change in what the education fund pays for, so that you would move some spending out of the ed fund and into the general fund, and that would impact how much property taxes are going.
Sure, yeah, that's a policy choice. Right, so you saw that policy decision was made last year. There was the 25 million in general fund revenues transferred to the education fund to buy down those property tax rates. those are all policy choices that you all will be grappling with over the course of the session in terms of if you want to make changes to the education fund, what changes would you want to make? If you want to transfer revenues in or transfer revenues out, also a policy choice. And all of those considerations, we reflect here in the Ed Fund Outlook to say, these are the ins and outs. With these changes, this is how everything shakes out.
I'm gonna ask another question if no one else has one.
I have one.
Okay,
At the risk of looking stupid.
thank you for risking
Do
that.
often. So the next week, we're really going to get an update on the actual revenues in this fiscal year, which is going to lead to just a reforecast for what 2026 looks like. So that's what we're going to be talking about more than this has an impact on the existing revenue for this year.
Yes, absolutely, yes. So the e-board will meet next week. There will be a new revenue forecast. And essentially what we're going to see here is what are the forecasted changes to our non-property revenue sources. So we'll see these updates here in FY26 for what the economist consensus forecast is for sales and use, purchase and use. So we'll update that here in the Ed Fund Outlook. We, your JFO finance team, will come back in and say, here are the updated forecasted revenues. This is how it's impacting the Ed Fund.
I think a sort of, I want to add the detail of sort of FY25 feeds FY26. So the e-board projections forecast will wind up in the FY26 forecast and change all the numbers within that. But if the revenues come in softer at the end of the year, that will change FY25, and that will mean more money, less money in FY25 to flow through to FY26.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes. And that's an important nuance, which I should have mentioned here. This is what we're seeing here in the bottom of the education fund outlook. You have those available funds. In line 39 is the prior year unreserved and allocated. So that's kind of your surplus. So you can see in FY26, we have that 33 million forecasted of surplus for FY25. But as the chair mentioned, when we have better information, if FY25 is tying out under, and that 33 million were to go down, then those are fewer dollars to be using in FY26.
Sure. I had a question about how conservatism, or if it is built into any of the estimates. So, for example, just as the governor might say, I'm going to buy down rates if the yield comes out better than people expected, which, in my district, they said, great, the yield is better than we expected. That gives us more space. Is there conservatism built into that yield number that sort of accounts for the fact that if it looks better than people expected, they might go and have a higher school budget than they might have otherwise? Is that built in, or are these just sort of your very best estimates of where the revenue and expenses are going?
That's an excellent question. And this is reflecting the best available information that we have right now. So at JFO, we have to walk a very fine line of, we're not school districts, we're not building budgets. We can't forecast how each school district is going to respond to things being discussed at the state level. So that's why we're going to come in every couple weeks with the Agency of Education and say, AOE has this better information. We're using this better information. Now this is what it's showing. So I guess to answer your question, no, this is not reflecting our guesses of what school districts may or may not do moving forward.
Yes, a small follow-up question. And the question is then, so I understand the AOE is providing information based on budgets that are coming into them now because folks are starting to make those public now. When it's December 1st, most of those budgets aren't public yet. They're not even fully formed. So where does that forecast come from that says, oh, we're expecting school spending to go up by about 6.1%?
So that is a forecast that comes from the Agency of Education. I would defer to them to talk about the nuances of how they collect that number. Big picture, it's a discussion between folks at the agency and school districts in terms of, at that point in time, what is their best estimate of their school budget growth or decrease.
But is anyone sort of estimating possible changes in behavior, or is everyone acting on sort of what current understanding of current reality is?
My understanding of the process is its current understanding in reality.
3 hands at once, so exciting. Representative Brannigan.
So, ever since day one, the Ed Fund has been so big. So much money in it that it's been tempting for everybody to just dip in a little bit here, a little bit there. And, I just want to find out if this, really happens, the TIF districts and the current use. My understanding back in the old days was that that money came before it went into the Ed Fund. It was paid by taxpayers, and they get their tax rates, which are on this sheet, you know, they change every year to pay their property tax. And I understand about how each town is different and all that. But before that money gets dumped into the Ed Fund, some of it is scooped out for both of those purposes and maybe other things that I don't know about. I know that we, years ago, used to pay for all the education that happens in prisons. And that's gone now. I don't know where that money comes from now, but it's not the Ed Fund. So does that really happen? Does that money come out? I know Sarah, you know, her husband worked for the Ed agency, Sarah Blonde.
Teach out.
Teach out one time. But, about, so this has got to be 10 years. I've been on this committee a long time. It was 9 million back then that the TIF districts took out of the Ed Fund before the money hit the Ed Fund. So does that still happen? And what are the amounts now?
So I will say, big picture, yes, TIF is still a policy program. I will say, full disclosure, I'm not the TIF expert. That's Ted in our office, so I would need to Ted Barnett.
Yeah.
I would need to defer to him. I will certainly follow up with him about that. And current use is also a tax expenditure out of the education fund. That's another number I don't have off, but I will get for you.
And we are gonna, we're planning to take specific testimony on all the tax expenditures out of the education fund. Definitely a hot topic for the year.
You understand where I'm going now, Madam Chair?
Absolutely. Yes. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And I would also add that other committees that have a policy focus on some of those expenditures out of the Ed Fund, we're hoping that they will also take testimony on those programs this year.
Okay.
Representative Bozzak and then Representative Holcomb, and then we are done for the day.
Thank you. On the property tax credit one, be noticing that it was 155 and 24, projected 153, and then the 168 spike, for lack of a better term, in 25. Was that because more people were claiming it, or just seems like a higher number than?
Yes, another great question. So the property tax credit, you'll recall, this is the aggregate of all of those folks who earn a property tax credit based off of their income. This change that we're seeing here in FY 25 of 168 is reflective of a one-time policy choice that the General Assembly made last year in the yield bill, H 887. And what that was a one-time increase in all folks who received a property tax credit of 13%.
Thank you.
Not try to question anymore, but I just want to say, I appreciate your observation that this is a dynamic environment. And I'm always and have long been concerned about the use of one-time money because it creates a cliff the following year, but it also interrupts the signal between the choices people make and the experience that they have and result. So I share your concern about committing now to buying down the tax rate because we are perpetuating that problem and people are trying to make smart decisions. They don't have their long-term weighted to do first. They're trying to vote out their budget. And so every time we throw in another piece like that, I worry that we're muddying the water. I got good planning.
Thank you. And that's a helpful piece of context actually for me to close with. I want to thank you both for coming in and joining us today. And then also add that one of the interesting things about the yield bill is that because we set the rates after people have done an enormous amount of work with hypothetical rates, it means that a lot of people around the state are sort of watching the daily deliberations of it and seeing it as sort of signals towards their behavior in a way that's a combination of just sort of like deep diligence and attention to the legislative process and some sort of like astrology of sorts. And that is our fault for having this fairly strange process where we set rates after behaviors happen, right? And so there is a tension on us, and the hypothetical conversations we might have might change behavior in the field. And that's something to be mindful of as we do our work. So thank you, everyone. I hope you have time this afternoon that we are giving you by ending at 2 to continue catching up on all of the reports that we sent around, and see you at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning in room 11.